In 1962, the U.S. Peace Corps brought a valuable time of collaboration and cooperation in Nepal, and Nepal had the pleasure of hosting wonderful youth from America for their mission to do good in the world. In this series, we will explore their experiences and understand the impacts those individuals made, starting with Mr. Creighton Peet. Welcome to Culture Nepal, everyone. Today we have a guest who was a Peace Corps volunteer for Nepal many decades ago in 1960s. That time was the beginning of turning point of Nepal's changing culture with the opening to the Western world. Our guest name is Creighton Peet, and he is going to share his experiences and impression of Nepal and Nepali culture at that time. Please welcome Mr. Creighton to enjoy our conversation. Welcome to Culture Nepal, Mr. Peet. Namaste.
Namaste.
Before we begin, can you please tell us a little bit about you and Peace Corps in general and its history?
Sure. Well, Peace Corps was started up during the President John F. Kennedy's administration as a way to, I suppose, export American culture to other parts of the world, and to create friendships with other parts of the world in a way that's very different from, say, military support or even USAID type support. And I was one of the earlier groups in Nepal. I was group number 8, and there were actually 4 groups that entered Nepal at the same time. One was a teachers group, which is the one I was in. There was also a panchayat development group. There was also an agriculture extension group, and there was also a bridge building group, all at the same time. So we had groups of engineers and educators and agriculturalists, etc. But I was in the education side.
I see. And so how many people in a group at that time?
I think in the education group, and it was both teaching English but also math, science, there were probably about 40 volunteers just for that part.
Oh, so for each group, it's depending upon the
yes,
need of
it would depend. And the Peace Corps was the way it worked. Nepal government would invite the U.S. government the American Peace Corps to send volunteers for certain jobs. So we were invited by the governments of any country that wanted a Peace Corps.
Sure, that sounds a very friendly gesture in both sides. And I know that USA is a second Western country to have that diplomatic relationship with, because up until 50, as you know,
yes.
it was a closed country,
Very close,
and the only relationship we had was a neighboring country, which is India and China, and the British who ruled the India many years ago. That was the time when I was growing up pretty much, and still was in the culture that was very ancient. We call it Sanatani culture. And so we were all very curious and happy to see our guest, and we were taught to treat guests as a god, as you know. And so at that time I was a child. I was just not really, could not understand so many things. But now looking back, I see that must be a really good time for somebody to go to Nepal. And can you tell us, why did you choose to go to Nepal in a personal level? First of all, why were you even interested in Peace Corps, and why did you choose? It must be kind of a little adventurous and intimidating venture for somebody who lived in America, with the infrastructure.
Well, it's a good question. In college, I just had finished college, and I had majored in anthropology, and I became very interested in Asia in particular. And I've always also loved the mountains, and that certainly attracted me about Nepal. but I was prepared to go into the Peace Corps in any country where I got accepted, but I did request Nepal as my first choice, and I was lucky enough
Wow.
to be able to go to my first choice country.
Wow.
So, along with 40 other people.
So that was your first Peace Corps volunteer opportunity, or did you go other country before?
That's the first
Very
and,
first.
and only Peace Corps volunteer.
Oh.
I had, during my undergraduate years, and between my junior and senior year, I had done some field work in the Caribbean as part of my anthropology training on actually Grand Cayman Island.
Wow.
But so I had some field experience outside of the United States before I went to Nepal, but I had never been to Asia before.
That must be a very exciting and very unique experience when you reached there. Can you tell us from your, like, how was your experience? I mean, can you remember the excitement?
I think everybody was really fascinated. As I'm sure you know, Nepal was very different at that time than it is now.
Yep.
Kathmandu, we flew into Kathmandu, and it wasn't nearly as crowded as it is now. The cities, the Patan, Bhaktapur, and Kathmandu were surrounded by agricultural land. The Japu farmers are extremely good farmers.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, my understanding is that most of that land has now been turned over to housing,
Yes.
which is really a shame.
Right.
But and I haven't been back to Nepal since I left in March of 1988.
Were you trained about Nepali culture, Nepali system before? Who trained you in
Yeah,
US?
so we had 3 months of training. Our training took place on the big island of Hawaii.
Wow.
And we had Nepali instructors, language instructors, who came to Hawaii to teach us Nepali. And actually, that's the first time that we also met Dorbista, because he was also explaining about the culture of Nepal. He didn't stay the whole time, but he did come and he did meet with us and explain about Nepali culture. And
that was in Hawaii?
That's correct.
Oh, so
yeah.
he came to train you before you leave?
He was one of the people who came, yes. The language instructor stayed for the whole 3 months. But he came, and then he had other things, so he went back to Nepal.
Yeah. So talking about Dorbista, you brought this book, People of Nepal, which is very famous. And then you have actually a signed copy of Dorvardubista's book, which is very valuable and very fascinating. And he is a very celebrated sociologist, anthropologist, and activist. And we can talk about him more later, but this is really like something special that you brought, and thank you for bringing. So was that helpful to get trained here, and then did you find the similar thing there, or you had to learn a lot more?
Well, of course, you can't really understand a culture until you live in it. We learned how to eat with our hands. We learned how to eat dal bhat, and we had to learn how to eat spicy food.
Yeah.
I remember the first time I had spicy food, I started to cry.
Oh, really?
But by the end of my stay in Nepal, I certainly was enjoying eating hot food.
Yeah.
So things like that. We had to learn how to squat, which is very important. Being younger, I don't think I could probably still squat now, but I'm not sure I'd do a very good one.
Did you learn yoga and meditation while you were there, or
not? I mean, not. We didn't learn it. I certainly observed people who would meditate. There was plenty of time for each of us to spend time doing that, if you so choose. I love to hike. I'd been hiking in mountains since the age of 5, so I took my free time. I would walk around in the rural areas where I was posted.
Yes.
I was posted in the Far East. It was part of Creighton district, but it was Atrai, which is the very eastern part of Tirtham
Yes.
district.
I haven't even
Yeah.
been there myself. So it's probably a very good opportunity for you. Do you think that Peace Corps job opportunity was helpful for your career path, or?
Well, it certainly solidified my interest in working in international context. And I did go back to Nepal a number of times. I did my doctoral field work in Nepal. I went back as a consultant for an FAO-funded project looking at how to improve agricultural development in Nepal. And I also went back for over 4 years on an integrated rural development project in the Rapti Anchal. So I've more or less spent about almost 9 years of my life in Nepal.
Yeah.
So I felt like it was my home.
Yes. Please stay tuned for the next part in our series, and thank you for watching.
Purasya Puramada